So I've been examining Gibson for some time, and I've come to the conclusion that the so-called villain behind some of the things that Gibson gets a lot of criticism for, it isn't Henry J, it isn't Mark Agnesi. I would say that the real puppet master, the master of puppets, is actually someone else, and I'm going to get right into it. So we need to begin this by zooming out a little bit, looking at Gibson in the context of not just the guitaring world, but the world in general. And here's the reality: Gibson is a corporation. Secondly, it is not a very large corporation. I was looking this up, and the revenue of Gibson into 2023 was $990 million, which may sound like a lot, but it is tiny in the context of how big companies really are. Let me give you something that helps you frame this. When I was working, I was not the biggest cog. I was in charge of a certain business, a sub-business of my large company. And the business that I was in charge of, heading the marketing for, was $500 million. So Gibson is barely twice that. And I by no means was someone like some big shot or anything. So just to give you some context. Now, being a corporation, and especially being in charge of delivering the revenue and profit, the P&L of a corporation, leads to certain actions. And what I want to do today is I want to give you some perspective on what might be driving some of the decision making behind Gibson, both during the Henry J years as well as more recently with new management. 2 or 3 things I have realized. Number one, Gibson ultimately has been driven by what their customer wants, but they have slowly gotten better at understanding the customer. And the way they found this out is actually through experimentation. If you look at what Gibson, and this has been a long, slow process, but Gibson in the 1980s first started reissuing the 1959 Les Paul. They got a sense this is what people wanted. In the 2000s, they experimented a lot. They did all sorts of different model runs, variations, artist models, etc. But ultimately, what they always found success with was reliving the past. It was just something that the market constantly fed back to them. It's very, very clear. Collector's Choice was successful. 1959 Les Paul, every time they get so-called closer, it was successful. Innovations such as robot tuners were horribly unsuccessful. So if your consumer is constantly giving you a certain feedback, as a steward of a brand, as someone in charge of creating demand for the brand, that's what a marketing team would be doing, it would be very irresponsible to ignore the consumer. Right. And I also want to talk about another criticism which I have leveled at Gibson a number of times, is quality control. This too is very interesting, and I've grappled with it, but then I was trying to just put myself in the shoes of Gibson's management. And I have come to a surprising conclusion. So any company, any brand, any products that you're selling, you generate a certain amount of revenue from the products. And then you have some certain fixed costs that you can't get away with, your factory, so on and so forth, the people, payroll, etc., etc. And then you're left with a certain budget. I mean, of course, you still have to turn a profit. Otherwise, what's the point of being in a corporation? And then you're left with a budget, and you have to decide how to best allocate it. And if you're looking at Gibson, you have a few choices. Should I allocate it behind quality control? That seems to be the obvious culprit. Let's get rid of those finishing issues or all the hundreds of other things that people call out on Gibsons. That's option number 1 for me if I'm managing Gibson. Option number 2 is, hey, let's go and seek out more artist endorsements. Let's go and get Slash's permission to do all of this, or let's quote Kirk Hammett, or let's quote Jimmy Page, as they've been doing recently. That's still money, so it's a choice. You don't have all the money in the world. The guitars are generating a certain amount of money by selling them. Then you have projections of how much more you will sell when you will do either of these things. If I improve the quality control, how much more will I sell? If I get this artist endorsement, how much more will I sell? I will make a forecast. And that is kind of how decision making will be driven. We'll make informed forecast based on what we have seen in the past. Has there truly been a correlation between quality control and sales increase? Has there been a correlation? I would guess the answer is no, by the way. Has there been a correlation between adding modern features and sales increase? Again, I think the answer is a hard no. Because look at it. Robot tuners, of course, a terrible idea, or maybe a terrible execution. I don't know about the idea. But think of all the modern appointed Les Pauls. Were they successful? I used to have a Les Paul standard premium or something. It was like amazing quilt top. If that quilt top was on an R9, that would be a very expensive R9. But because it was on a Les Paul standard, a premium plus something that it was called, it had coil splits and a thinner heel and all of that. That guitar is practically worth nothing. I mean, compared to an R9, is worth nothing on the used market. So that kind of shows you the premium that the market is placing on modern features. What if, as the management of Gibson, I decide, let me quote this artist. Let's say Jimmy Page. Let's convince Jimmy Page to finally let us recreate his iconic stairway guitar. I probably need to pay Jimmy Page a little bit. Maybe it's a flat fee up front. Maybe it's a percentage of the guitar. Will that generate hype? Will that generate profit? Let me convince Kirk Hammett after he replicated Greenie. Let me convince him to do his Les Paul. His Flying V. Let me convince Slash to do yet another guitar. Let me convince Dave Grohl to let's make an Epiphone version. I think you can see what we're going here. So if you are the steward, if you're a person managing a company in a capitalist shareholder-driven system, which is what all of this is, we can have a separate conversation. Is capitalism better than other systems? That's a whole different discussion. I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to assume we live in the world that we live in, and this is fine. So given these constraints, if you are managing Gibson, what would you do? Remember, you have a limited budget. You don't have unlimited budget that I'll solve quality control. I will also get all the artists, all of this. So as much as a guitarist, I am constantly, I won't say unhappy, but I'm constantly a little bit not enthused by Gibson's latest. I'm never enthused when they launch another artist collaboration and so on and so forth. It doesn't interest me as a guitarist. I have moved on. I've moved on to guitars like Mayonnaise, PRS, ESP. Do I love my Gibson Explorer? Just on that one for a second, right? That guitar was like when Gibson was just experimenting. So that guitar was a pretty expensive guitar to make if you think about it. Different scale, length, different body, very small production. It didn't sell out for 7-8 years. I could have bought two of them. I bought one of them maybe 5 or 6 years after it had been on the market. It's been sitting in the local shop in Singapore. Of course, now there's a latent demand. That thing is worth 3 or 4 times. But that just is another demonstration of what the consumer really wants. So going back, if I am Gibson management, so as we're talking about, as a consumer, I'm not excited by what they do. But as a person who has managed a large iconic brand, and I would say the brand that I manage is probably even larger than Gibson, I understand the responsibility that the management has to sustain and to continue growing the brand profitably. And because of that, probably if I was in the same position as Gibson management, I would probably prioritize artist collaborations and more signature models versus turning that budget towards quality control. That's the sad reality, perhaps. That said, I would do certain things differently. I would certainly focus a lot more on acquiring new users, acquiring newer guitar players, not with just token, like I have this cheaper Gibson Les Paul. That's not how one would do it. Look at PRS, SE, look at Fender. They're doing a great job with new users. I would do that differently. But yes, the sad reality is, if you have to blame anyone for the things that you do not like about Gibson guitars, it is not Mark Agnesi and Play Authentic. It is not Cesar. It is not Henry J. It is actually you and me looking into the mirror, the consumers, the buyers of Gibson guitars. All right, this is all I have for this time. See you next time.